Today's guest is a UFO and cryptid researcher from Pennsylvania in the US. Since 1959, he's investigated thousands of mysterious cases, including UFO sightings, encounters with strange creatures such as Bigfoot, thunderbirds, black panthers, as well as very many other weird events. Please give a huge Koit welcome to Stan Gordon. Hello Stan, and welcome to KoitCast.
Hi Koit, thanks for having me on your program today.
It's an absolute honour and my pleasure to have you here. I have heard your voice many times down the years on all the classic radio show programs and other podcasts and stuff. It's great to have you here talking with me. So thank you for coming. The first question will be, who are you? Where are you from? All that good stuff in your own words.
Well, I'm from Pennsylvania here in the USA. I'm from Greensburg, Pennsylvania. I've been involved in researching UFOs, or UAPs as they call them now, and Bigfoot and cryptids, actually since I started in 1959 as a young kid who was interested in science and electronics, and I've been out in the field since 1965, since the incident happened near Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. I've had a hotline set up for the public since 1969. I've been receiving phone reports and, of course, email reports in more recent years, and my phone calls never stop with reports coming in, even this year. I had 3 volunteer research groups for many years, starting in 1970, and went on for many years. I no longer have them, but I'm still in contact with many other researchers. I'm still out in the field as best I can be. It's been a long time since then, but I had teams of scientists and engineers and police officers. A lot of specialists devoted their time. We all volunteered to do this to investigate many reports here in Pennsylvania. And there's a lot of activity in Pennsylvania. And last year was a very active year for close-range UFO sightings, close-range daylight Bigfoot sightings, cryptid reports. And it was a very interesting time period.
Magic. Now, I was literally going to ask you a question about that, because obviously you said you've been receiving phone reports, etc., and emails for a long time. Has it increased over the years, or has it waned? Where are we at with that?
Well, going back historically, back in 1973, which luckily I had my first group already organized, and we were covering the whole state of Pennsylvania, investigating incidents. In 1973, first we had the biggest UFO wave ever documented in the country. Went on all year long with hundreds and hundreds of UFO sightings. Many of the newspapers in Pennsylvania covered a lot of those reports at the time because they were also receiving reports. And then in the summer of 1973, we had the biggest outbreak of Bigfoot sightings, which was very interesting. And sure, we can talk more about that as we go on the program. But that's when I began to realize that Bigfoot was much stranger than just some type of unknown primate or some type of unknown species that we had not able to identify. And so that was the biggest year ever. Every year I received reports all year round on all type of weather conditions. But last year was very interesting because there were so many really detailed, close-range, many daylight UFO reports here in Pennsylvania. A lot of reports of very large, elongated, cylindrical, well, what the government's calling tic-tac reports, even though I've had them for years, more cigar-shaped objects that were seen hovering in beautiful afternoons in this area and just suddenly just vanishing right before the witness' eyes, or in some cases moving so slow across the sky. Some witnesses said they couldn't understand how something that slow could even stay up in the sky. It was much slower than a normal aircraft. And then we had numerous reports of large, solid black triangular objects, low-level reports, multitudes of other reports. And then, of course, what was really intriguing and really the big increase on these reports I'll tell you about now was in 2022, continuing into 2023, where multiple reports, more and more coming in, of what I've called mini UFOs for years. That's these small balls or spheres or orbs of light very low to the ground. But in some cases in the last couple of years, they, even in daylight, they've been very low to the ground and have come up within feet of witnesses. And some of the cases are much stranger than that, in fact, appearing inside of people's homes. So these cases are really definitely increasing. But I say last year was an exceptionally busy year for very detailed quality reports of cryptids, of Bigfoot sightings, because many in daylight, many within 40, 50 feet of people, very good detailed accounts were coming in.
Do you think the details have gotten better over the years as technology has progressed alongside us?
Well, technology has definitely increased, and that's helped to get some pictures of certain anomalies coming in. But over the years, I've interviewed thousands of people. I've worked on multitudes of very, very detailed UFO cases. Many people never heard about some of these cases. I've written about some of them over the years, and there's a lot of information on my website, some of the historical cases, and some of them are just amazing, and they go on all the time. But I would just say that last year was a very interesting year because of the quality of the reports and the fact that you had all these other anomalies taking place while these other things were taking place as well. It was just a very intriguing time period.
Yeah, and that's nice to be a researcher when you've got that level of, the peak in the phenomenon, I imagine. What do you take the orb things to be? Do you think they're scout craft, some sort of sensors? What do you think they are?
Well, I was aware of them back in the 1960s. And like I said, for years I've called them mini UFOs. I've heard the reports in the 1960s. And then I've heard some periodically, but over the years, more and more reports have come in from widespread areas. But in 2022, here in Pennsylvania, we had the biggest surge of these kind of reports and detailed reports. And some of these cases were really, really intriguing. I'll give you one case. You'll hear me talk about Fayette County. So here in southwest Pennsylvania, we have a mountain range called the Chestnut Ridge. Okay. It's probably one of the strangest areas in the country for various phenomena that go on year after year. And while the ridge itself is a little less than 100 miles long, it goes through southwest Pennsylvania, through Westmoreland County, where I'm at, Fayette County, Indiana County, and extends a few miles into outside of Morgantown, West Virginia. There have been sightings all along the ridge, but there are certain areas along the ridge area that are more active than others where you have a lot of history of sightings, such as here around Derry Township, here in Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, and up over that ridge area. But Fayette County is very, very intriguing. And, for example, April 6th of 22, in daylight, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, one of my research associates, Jim Brown, investigated the incident. He was out there, I believe, within 45 minutes after it happened. It's really important to try to get these cases while they're fresh, the data is fresh, possible physical evidence is fresh. That's what I've always tried to do with my research groups and the researchers I'm involved with. But anyhow, this man and his wife, they were out in their garden, out in their yard, digging and planting some shrubs or whatever. About 50 feet away, they noticed about 10 feet above the fence line what they thought was a mylar balloon. It was silver, bright, circular, about 2 feet in diameter. As they're watching this thing slowly drift closer to them, it's getting brighter and brighter, and they realize it's not a balloon at all. Comes very, very close to them, and all of a sudden, it just like exploded. There was like a small lightning bolt that shot from the object to the ground. There was a sound like a small firecracker, like a snap from a spark, and that small spark started a small fire right there in the field that the man put out with a shovel. But at the same time that happened, that luminous object just disappeared. And when my associate got on the scene, if it was a firecracker or had been a mylar balloon, there would have been a lot of residue at the scene. There was absolutely nothing, not a thing on the scene, which is interesting. But then the reports got much more interesting as the time went on. So in October of 2022, some interesting things happened. So up in that area I just told you about, in that same general area, early morning, around 6 o'clock in the morning, it was a cold morning. This man just had his robe and slippers on, and his wife found him sound asleep outside on the porch, which he would never do in that cold weather. And when she finally was able to awaken him, which she had a problem doing, he told her as he was walking towards the box where the paper had been delivered, there was this small white sphere, ball of light, that was hovering there, and he got very close to it, and he got so tired, he immediately ran to the porch and fell asleep. So 3 days later, about 40 miles away, this is outside of Ligonier, Pennsylvania, so you have the areas of the Chestnut Ridge that goes through there, And then a short distance away, you go into the Laurel Ridge area, which also has a lot of history of weird things with Bigfoot sightings and UFOs and cryptids. But anyhow, so 3 days later, 2:30 in the morning, this woman lives in one of the big old homes out there with high ceilings. 2:30 in the morning, she goes into the restroom. She comes out of the restroom, and 5 feet away in her living room is this dark blue sphere, I believe about 1.5 to 2 foot in diameter, dark blue, with a dark mass moving around inside of it. She remembered taking one step towards it. She felt like a slight electrical jolt, and all of a sudden, she said she got so tired she had to go to sleep. The next day, she felt very sickly, very weak, and she talked to me, and she said, I'm an insomniac. For me to have fallen asleep that fast is something I never do, and she had no explanation for it. That's just an example of some of the reports that were coming in.
Yeah, and that last one, I mean, I've heard of those orbs being in people's living rooms and stuff before, not in this particular configuration, i.e. this color. It's normally like orange or white, isn't it, normally? But what do you think they are then? If they're putting people to sleep, are they part of the abduction phenomenon, or is it there's some sort of energy that unfortunately has the effect of, interacting with people and knocking them out?
It's extremely complicated and extremely unusual what we're finding out. What we're dealing with is so complex. And believe me, when I got involved in this years and years ago, I never expected to be finding these type of anomalies, this type of information. I started writing about it back in the 70s, and now in more recent years, we're hearing reports from all over the country and out of the country. I know Nick Redford, I'm sure you're familiar with him. He's had similar reports. The researchers have. And all I can tell you is this. Whatever we're dealing with is what I'm finding has a definite energy connection to it. So what I found years ago was that many close-range, low-level UFO incidents and many encounters with Bigfoot and other cryptids. So when we're talking about a cryptid, we're talking about a creature like Bigfoot that people report, but science has never confirmed exist. And I do with many, many types of cryptid cases here in Pennsylvania for years, some very, very strange cases. My latest book, Creepy Cryptids, has some extremely weird cases in it. But anyhow, so all these things are going on, and many cryptid sightings, as well as Bigfoot, occur in the vicinity of energy sources. So you've got a lot of sightings around power plants and high-tension power lines and radio towers and cell phone towers and bodies of water, gas wells, railroad tracks. Definitely an energy connection to a lot of the reports that are coming in. When I first heard these reports back in the 60s and then in the 70s, I thought we were dealing with some type of remote little probe that's sending back visual and audio data to some other source, whatever that might be. But the more I know about these things now, it seems to be much, much stranger. Over the years, I've had reports of these things pacing vehicles in daylight. I've had them enter people's homes and cars through open windows, sometimes go right through the walls of the house or disappear. I've had them tap on people's living room windows, and people go to the window and see them tap and get things fly off. But here's also the other thing that's been shown up more and more. There are certain areas here in Pennsylvania and around the country that the wooded areas have a lot of history of Bigfoot sightings. That many witnesses and investigators have encountered Bigfoot or Bigfoot evidence. And for years and years now, and sometimes after a Bigfoot sighting occurs and you have some researchers going up to investigate Bigfoot, they're seeing either unusual light phenomena, like bright flashes of light when there's no storms around, but very commonly they're seeing these small spheres, balls of light, orbs, whatever you may want to call them, low in the trees or very low to the ground. And as has happened in recent years, these objects are coming out of the woods and coming within feet of people. Very interesting.
It is highly interesting. Now, I had a conversation with a lady called Anne Traherne of the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle Centre in Scotland, and we had a fascinating conversation about almost like portals, yeah? So like in energy places, like you were alluding to, where you have ley lines and water sources underground that generate some sort of energy. There's a thinning, if you will, of, let's just call it dimensions. I don't know what it is, but a thinning, and then that's where spirits or whatever can cross over. It's almost like that these orbs and Bigfoot sightings and other phenomenon are similar in that vein. So where there's energy sources, there's almost that thinning of whatever veil is there, and they're sort of being seen through it or coming in. Is that where you're going now, do you think?
Yeah, well, again, what I'm doing with, and I'll talk to you about some of these amazing cases from the 70s when I began to realize we're dealing with something very strange and unusual. Whatever we're dealing with seems to have a physical and a non-physical aspect, physical and non-physical component to it, with both UFOs and even with many of the cryptids. And I've uncovered a lot of very strange things concerning the Bigfoot sightings, which is why apparently we have no bodies of whatever these things might be. One of the first things that we noticed back in 1973, as I mentioned earlier, we had all these UFO sightings. It was being covered a lot on the news in different areas. And then in the summer of 73, we had this massive Bigfoot outbreak that went on for weeks and months in the early 74. And many of those sightings were in daylight, many of them at very close range, sometimes multiple creatures. Myself or my teams, in many cases, we were on the scene of the incident within minutes to hours after they occurred. Many of the reports we were getting, we were really surprised. We were getting referrals from the news media and law enforcement agencies here to go out to investigate the reports. And that's why we were able to get to them so quick in a lot of cases. And one of the first things that turned up was we get on the scene at some of these locations. There'll be these very strange, unusual footprints, very long strides between the tracks under all type of ground conditions, including snow. The tracks would go for a short distance and then suddenly abruptly end when there should have been more tracks. And that's been going on around the country now for years and years, the same type of thing. There is no way under the conditions we found them, it could have been fabricated at that time. And then as time went on, in the weeks ahead, and again, from many other counties, many other widespread areas, people had no way of knowing back then because you didn't have the internet, you didn't have cell phones like we do today, so they didn't know what other people were reporting. Yet we're getting very similar strange accounts coming in. So one, we would find a pattern. We would have a UFO sighting in a certain area. Within minutes, hours, or days later, we'd have a Bigfoot sighting or vice versa. And then we had some of those amazing incidents with Bigfoot and UFOs seen together at the same time and place. And I can give you an example of some of the reports. For example, some of the cases are very detailed, so it takes me a few minutes to tell you, but they're incredible cases if you'd like me to talk about them.
Yes, there's one I know of that I've heard you talk about before involving, I believe, a sheriff and shooting into the tree line where there is a Bigfoot. That story is astounding. Would you mind reciting that one, if you know the one I mean?
I think you may be combining two different reports, but I will explain them to you. One,
okay,
thank you. The case you're talking about is probably one of the most famous anywhere in the world. It's been written up all over the world, I know by now. And it was October 25th, 1973, when the report came in. I remember it very, very well. There were many UFO reports coming in from widespread areas during that 24-hour period on my UFO hotline by phone. But anyhow, at 10:30 that night, I get a call from a state trooper, a state police officer from the Uniontown State Police Barracks in Fayette County, and he had just come back from investigating this multiple witness UFO landing. It was a very involved case. He asked me, he said, can you get a team up here as soon as you can? I think there's a good chance of something still on the farm in the pasture. So it was already late evening, but we did. I got my team together. We got our various equipment. We got our radiation meters. We got other equipment, and we found our way up to Fayette County, and I'm sure we spent the whole night up there. We were up there for the early morning hours. Took a while to get up to that area. Found out that around 9 o'clock that evening, you had 15 separate witnesses in that rural area that observed this very large, maybe size of a barn, big round sphere, about 100 feet off the ground. And this big object is hovering, but it's slowly moving downward. And it was the farmer's son who would be the adult. He was coming out to visit his family who owned the farm. And he sees the object. He sees people outside watching this thing. So he goes to a neighbor's house. It was a little better view from there. And he and the two young neighbor boys see this thing coming down, and they decide they want to go up and see what this thing is. Before they went up into the pasture, they stopped over his father's farm. They grabbed a 30-06, which is a pretty high-powered weapon, and a handful of ammunition is what he got. He didn't realize it at that time, but within that standard ammunition, he had 2 tracer bullets. So when you fire those tracer bullets, you just get that luminous trail. Anyhow, as we're riding up the farm road, the dogs around the area are going crazy. They have this high-pitched whining noise and these baby crying sounds. And as they get closer, the sounds are getting louder and louder. They park their vehicle at a slant to leave the headlights on so they can see their path up the hill. and they noticed that it looked like something was draining the power from their headlights that they had never had to have before. So they make their way up to the top of the pasture, and they're standing there. They can't believe what they're seeing. About 250 feet away, this huge object is now landed on the ground, or it's right above it. But it's not a complete round sphere at this point. It's a large, white, dome-shaped object, like a half a sphere.
Okay.
It's very large, illuminating the whole area, making a very loud whining noise as well. And then, as they're watching this thing, their attention's drawn about 75 feet away along a barbed wire fence. Because along that barbed wire fence are these two huge Bigfoot-like creatures walking slowly in their direction from along the barbed wire fence. The one in front's about 8 feet tall. The one behind is about 7 feet tall. They have very long, dark, matted hair hanging off the body. They have no neck. The arms are so long they're hanging below the knees almost to the ground. They have eyes, large eyes that are luminous, bright green and glowing. And they're making these baby crying, whining noises. The one young boy is so frightened he ran out of the field. The other young boy is yelling at the adult, shoot him, shoot him. So the fellow fires his first shot. He fires the first shot, which is a tracer. He fired over their head. There was no response. But interestingly now, what happens was he fires that second tracer. And when he does, the largest of the two creatures reaches out with one of its hands instead of grab that tracer. It makes a loud crying baby type sound, and that huge luminous object on the field suddenly just vanishes. It doesn't accelerate. It doesn't leave visually. It just vanishes and it's gone. So all the sound stops. Most of the luminosity is gone. The creatures turn around, start walking back along the fence line towards the woods. At that point, he's loading his weapon. He's firing live ammo into these creatures with no effect on them whatsoever. So they run back to the truck and go back to the farmhouse, told the family what happened, took to the neighbors, and called the state police. So the trooper arrived 45 minutes later, and the trooper said, I'm here to investigate the report. And the witness said, look, just forget about it. You can think I'm crazy. And the trooper said, look, he said, we had a report of two similar creatures on a mountain last night. I have to investigate the report. So they go up with the state police car, they go up to the site to look for evidence. The state trooper told me when they got on the scene, the area where the object had been on the ground was self-luminescent and glowing, about 100 feet or more in diameter. And he said he noticed that the farm animals wouldn't go anywhere near the area. He told me he shined his flashlight beam into the area, but he could barely see the beam. And he told me, he said, if I had a newspaper, I'm certain I could have read the newspaper because of the glow coming off the area. That's the very short part of the story. It got much, much deeper, much, much stranger. It's one of the strangest stories ever documented. That's when we began to realize, and when I say we, some of my team members, who I can tell you, some were very scientific people who were very skeptical, began to realize that we're dealing with something here that's much stranger than just an unknown animal. And when I talk to you about these reports, I am not suggesting that Bigfoot, for example, is a passenger, is a pilot in a spacecraft from another planet, because we don't know what these things are. I'm not suggesting this is extraterrestrial. For a lack of a better term, the more I know about it, I think we're doing something that's interdimensional. There's a physical and a non-physical component to it. These things, they come and they go, just like Bigfoot. That's why you find no bodies. And then I'll tell you about this other case, which is one of the strangest cases on record with Bigfoot that I investigated. And this is the one, among others, that convinced me that, once again, there's more to Bigfoot than just a physical unknown creature. If you'd like me to tell you about that one, I will.
Yes, please. I mean, I love that one that you've just told us. That's always stuck with me. Obviously, I've messed it up, like you said, mixed a few things together. But it's got a lot to it, that one, hasn't it? And I love it.
Oh, and a lot more than that. Again, it's too much to talk about. My Silent Invasion book about the 73 outbreak goes into great detail about all these cases, because we just don't have the time to talk about all this stuff. But anyhow, this other case was amazing. It was February 6, 1974, way up in the mountains here in southwest Pennsylvania. And over in this country at that time, there was some things going on. There was a big strike. There was gas rationing at the time, so I couldn't get gas to get up to that area till the next morning, early the next morning with my team. because of some of the things that were happening in this country, the state police and the National Guard in Pennsylvania were patrolling together at that time. You had members of both units that responded to this incident. So what happened was, here's a woman, lived in the mountains all her life. She had a little cabin home. She was sitting there watching TV. It was just a normal evening when she heard on her little front porch something was out there knocking these empty soda cans, pop cans around. So a couple of weeks before, I believe it was, she had a pack of wild dogs came through, and she thought, I bet those dogs are back. So she thought, I'll just grab my 16-gauge double-barrel shotgun, and I'll load one chamber, and I'll shoot over their head, and I'll scare those dogs away, which is what she proceeded to do. So she loads one chamber of her shotgun. She walks up to the front door, turns on the switch for the outside porch light. She steps out, but there's no dogs there. 6 feet in front of her is a 7-foot-tall, hair-covered Bigfoot. As soon as she put the lights on, it put its arm straight up over its head. And how does she react? She pulls the trigger and fires right into it. She said there's this bright flash of light, like the flash on a camera, and it physically vanished in front of her. But there's more to it. So her in-laws lived 100 feet away, and they heard the gunshot, and they called and asked her, what are you shooting at? She explained to them. So the son-in-law grabs his sidearm, his pistol, starts walking up that dark road, and apparently around that time period, he reportedly encountered like 4 or 5 hairy people with eyes like coals of fire. And also, there's this large luminous object, they said like a big Christmas ornament, hovering over the trees at the same time. That's when they called the state police for help. And I talked to the primary investigator, and he said, by the time they found the place way up in the mountains, everything was over. But he said something strange happened there. He said, first of all, the witnesses were visually frightened. They were very shaken. They gave great details about what had taken place on the farm. But what convinced him was the animal reactions. And I'm not sure if I told you this or not, but, all the years I've been doing this now, going on 65 years, working on thousands of cases, I've interviewed hundreds of Bigfoot and crypto witnesses and thousands of UFO witnesses over the years. I've seen a lot of evidence. I have never personally seen a Bigfoot or a UFO or a ghost or anything I could not explain. I've seen a lot of evidence. I've talked to a lot of credible people, seen a lot of things. There's something going on out there, that's for sure. But the animal reactions I have seen, and very commonly, even in recent years, even last year, witnesses who have dogs, especially very big dogs, who are very close to these creatures, they're just like suddenly in massive fear. They don't bark, they shake, they cower. Sometimes they'll lie on the ground, they'll move their eyes around, but they won't bark. Sometimes they won't eat right for 2 or 3 days later. That is very, very common. And that's what happened up there. When they arrived on the scene, the authorities, they had several big dogs. They had other animals. The animals were all very quiet. They were moving around where they generally don't do, but the dogs would not make a sound. And that's now the next morning when I got on the scene, everything was back to normal. The dogs were all barking very loudly. That was the case among others that convinced me that we're dealing with something, again, that has a physical and a non-physical component to it. These things, they come and they go. They're here and they're going under certain conditions, and that is why we have no bodies of Bigfoot.
Yeah, I think the animal reactions are incredibly telling because let's be fair, humans can lie, right? That's part of our condition. Animals don't lie; they just react. It's as simple as that. So, how many cases do you think you have where animals are reacting?
Oh, many, many. And it's not just you. It's not just the Bigfoot cases. We hear this sometimes in other cryptid cases, and also with low-level UFO sightings. And there's so much that people do not know about the Bigfoot phenomenon and all the strange aspects. I have a whole lecture I do over here in this country called "Strange Aspects of Elusive Bigfoot," and I get very, very good response from people. And a lot of people, in fact, who attend from all kind of backgrounds, from science backgrounds and educators and first responders, police officers, a lot of people attend my lectures. And when they hear this, they said, that's the only thing that makes any sense. Because after so many years, and I've talked to so many people in the Bigfoot field, and, I knew about these things in the 70s. I started writing about them. And then years later, you're hearing about Skinwalker Ranch. Well, what I was dealing with in the 70s was very similar to Skinwalker activity. And now you have these places all over the country where similar type of things are occurring. So it's really intriguing. But for example, with some of the Bigfoot reports, well, let's go back a little further. You may be aware, if you know about some of the UFO history in this country, that back in the 50s, the 60s, other years, you would hear these reports of these large, solid metallic objects very low, pacing vehicles, hovering their vehicles, and in some cases, they would begin to have a propulsion problem. The motors would begin to sputter. They lose power. The headlights would dim. The object would move off, and then the power would come back on to normal. The same thing has been recorded with Bigfoot encounters, but it's not well known or discussed. But I've investigated incidents here in Pennsylvania where a Bigfoot walked out very close to a vehicle, and when it did, they began to lose power in the vehicle, and when the creature ran off, the power came back on. It's the same type of thing with these EM effects.
Wow.
And
yeah, I didn't know that bit. So that obviously tells you there's an electromagnetic component to Bigfoot then.
Yeah, but then it gets even better. And maybe this is a part of it with some of the animal reactions, because they're able to sense things, of course, that we cannot.
Yeah.
And, people quite often ask me, well, how come you don't ever get any good Bigfoot pictures or UFO pictures? Well, that's not exactly true, because, yes, I do get pictures. I've gotten quite a number of them in recent years. There's some pretty good UFO photographs on my website you can see from the last couple of years, especially these daylight cigar-shaped objects moving slowly across the sky or hovering, and they're very interesting. But we do get pictures. I get security camera pictures in. I get game cam pictures in. I get phone pictures in. But there's another aspect to it. For years now, and I'd say more and more in the last 10 years or so, I hear from many people, and even last year, I have some of these cases on my website, and go into great detail. People have their fully charged cell phones seeing these unusual objects at low level. That a couple of things happen. One, in some cases, they're immediately beginning to record these things, and moments later, their fully charged batteries are completely drained of power. That's when something has been reoccurring for quite a long time. And then in other cases, you have people who have fully charged phones who are attempting to take photographs, or in some cases, like last year, they have the camera in video mode. They can see it on the monitor on their phone. They can see the recording. When they play it back, there's no recording, no video, or sometimes they might get a couple still pictures. So that's something that's been going on more and more. I've even heard these cases similar with some of the cryptid cases. It even goes more fascinating, where I've talked to people who, right after having a cryptid encounter with a strange creature, there was some physical evidence at the scene, such as odd footprints. And when they went to take the picture, the same thing happened. The normally operating camera or phone camera would malfunction. And then we have cases, again, even with animal reactions. I'll give you another example with the UFO. This happened 2015. Beautiful morning here in western Pennsylvania, up in the mountains. This man is sitting there at the table next to the window, having breakfast, drinking coffee. His large dog's laying on the rug next to him. Dog goes with him everywhere. And as this man is sitting there drinking coffee, suddenly it gets completely black outside, just like a terrible storm come out of nowhere. No storms were expected. He thought, what the heck's going on? He grabs his fully charged phone and he yells to his dog to come with him. The dog refused to go outside. The dog goes with him everywhere. So he couldn't understand, why wouldn't the dog go out? So the guy goes out the back door, goes out to his driveway. 500 feet above him is this huge, solid black silent triangle just hovering there. What does he do? He grabs his phone that's fully charged, aims at the object, and moments later, that fully charged battery is completely drained of power. That's the kind of things that we're hearing about more and more.
Yeah, well, that's a great story, and that's one that's been repeated quite often, isn't it? I mean, like where people will go outside and they will see something large blot the stars, or sometimes even in daylight, just take ages to go across the sky because it's moving very slowly above them. People have said that they could almost throw rocks at it, and one bloke even shot it, didn't he? If you know that.
Oh,
case.
yeah. And then again, there's so many incidents. I deal with these things regularly. Almost every day I get calls on current and past reports. People call me quite often with incidents, things they've seen in the last couple of weeks or years or months ago, and call in a report. So I hear a lot of reports that go unreported, and then they're calling in to report something. But there were so many incidents, and I can give you some great examples. Let's see, September 3rd, 1987. So this is on a four-lane major highway in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, where we had a big mall at the time, Green Gate Mall. There's a lot of traffic on this road. Early that evening, you had multiple witnesses, including law enforcement, to see this huge, solid, metallic object. It's a very large cylindrical object, kind of like a Goodyear blimp, but more elongated, kind of cigar-shaped, you could say, with multiple lights on it, completely silent. This thing is about 300 feet long, and this thing is only about 300 feet over top of the high-tension power lines. And this thing is moving very slowly. It crosses the highway over the cars, and on the other side of the highway, you have a apartment complex and you have a power substation. And as the people were watching, this huge object that was moving horizontal suddenly turns vertical in the sky, and when it does, all the power in the area, including the mall, went out. And when the engineers went to investigate, find out the cause, they found behind the mall in that line there, they found all three of the master fuses had been blown in the circuit, which is something that just doesn't happen.
It wasn't like sucked power out, as in the thing was charging up. Do you think it was just a reaction to whatever powers that craft?
Well, there's theories for years and years. I hear all kind of things. I have no doubt there's a electromagnetic effect. There's an energy connection to it. Some people theorize that somehow maybe they need to be near the power lines or whatever to recharge their power system. I'm not so sure about that. But there's definitely a electromagnetic involvement. There's the EM effects involved in a lot of these cases, but it also goes on with the cryptid reports, and you have similar things going on with these balls of light reports. One of the really fascinating cases from 1973, when all this weird stuff was going on, this was north of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and that day you had two witnesses who were out there in the country waiting for somebody to come by to pick them up. They see this huge white hair-covered Bigfoot. You don't hear about the white ones very often. We still get those reports on occasion. And it's running across the road, but in one of its hands, it's carrying a small glowing ball of light. And as it runs into the woods, a short time later, this large object came across the sky and projected a beam of light down into the woods where the creature ran into. We thought that was fascinating.
That is awesome, that one. That's because that's direct interaction with three sort of phenomena there, isn't it? The craft itself, the orb, and then the Bigfoot. And a specialized Bigfoot at that.
Yeah, and these are the kind of things we still hear about. I mean, again, it's not just here in Pennsylvania. I mean, I deal mainly in PA cases, but I talk to a lot of investigators from out of state and a lot of witnesses from out of state that call me as well. And you have similar type of things going on in many, many other places.
Now, how does the standard Bigfoot researcher jive with what you're finding or being reported to? Because obviously there's lots of people who would say that this creature is a flesh and blood creature that we just haven't found bodies of yet, for whatever reason. Yeah. Do you get, that sort of Bigfoot researcher coming to you, and then you'll both have a conflab and work out what really do you think it is? Or do you keep, or do they keep separate?
Back in 1973, when all these things are going on, the strange stuff, I was in contact with many of the well-known names in the Bigfoot field, many who are now have passed away, in the United States and out of the country. And a lot of them I had either written to or we had communicated by phone at the time, and we're discussing what's happening in Pennsylvania. And a number of them said to me, they said, we are aware of these reports. They are so strange. We don't know what to do with it. But they told me, some of these people told me, they said, I am not going to write about it because I know it would be laughed at by my peers. My position was, look, these cases are well documented. I don't have the answers to what's going on, but I'm not about to pretend it's not happening. So I was publishing this information. And I can tell you now, in the years since then, especially in the last several years, you're hearing more reports now from all over the United States, many other countries reporting the same kind of thing. And I can tell you, knowing some of the well-known names in the Bigfoot field today, they're getting more reports. I've talked to researchers throughout the country. They're getting the same kind of reports. And even some of the really good researchers here in Pennsylvania, I can tell you, who I know very well, who have always been skeptical of these reports. Well, now in more recent years, they are getting more reports from other people. And in some cases, about a year, maybe 2 years ago now, some of these researchers were in an area, it's a very active area. in the mountainous area where a lot of ongoing strange phenomena is going on up there. They're having cryptid sightings, the balls of light, light phenomena, screams and howls, all kind of weird things going on. They had an incident about 2 years ago, I believe it is now, where several of them that night experienced multiple small balls of light coming out of the woods within feet of them. And let me tell you, I think their lives were changed, and they now realize there's something more to this than meets the eye. And that's something I'm finding more and more over the years. You're finding more and more researchers now who are getting these reports and more willing to talk about them, and there's something going on out there.
So it's almost as if they can't throw the data away and they can't ignore it anymore. So they're having to come around to this weird aspect of it.
Well, I think anybody that's open-minded to Bigfoot, when I got out in this field, I started investigating Bigfoot in the 1960s. I was completely convinced that Bigfoot was some type of unknown primate. That's the only thing that made any sense. Until all these incidents began to come to my attention. First in 1972 and then 1973 with that major outbreak we talked about a little bit. And that's when I began to realize, my gosh, what are we getting into here? But you had so many reports and such detailed reports. And I mean, my gosh, we got to some of these locations and we're talking these men with guns in their hands with tears coming out of their eyes that were so frightened. I mean, I remember at least two families, we were on the scene, and I remember one case we were on there when the state police were there, and they packed their clothes up, some clothes, and left their homes for a few days. They were so scared. I mean, that's the kind of reaction you were getting from people. And you knew something was going on. But some of these cases were just amazing. Like, why are there not more tracks? And some of the things people are telling us from widespread areas is in daylight, they're seeing these huge hairy creatures that are standing there, maybe 40, 50 feet away from them, maybe a little more, a little less, and suddenly they vanish, and moments later they reappear somewhere else nearby. We're getting these from miles and miles away from different people who never knew about these kind of reports. Those are the kind of things that were going on. And now we're finding similarities with Bigfoot, other cryptids. Well, another thing a lot of people don't know about, on occasion, sometimes Bigfoot will be accompanied by another cryptid. Or in the areas where these type of things are ongoing, you have other cryptid activity taking place at the same time that all this other weird phenomena is happening. And that's pretty much what was happening last year in 2023. We had these, quite a number of very detailed, close-range, low-level UFO sightings in many different areas. And then you had, at the same time, you're getting all these weird cryptid reports, all these Bigfoot sightings in daylight, all kind of other anomalous things being reported by the public. Sometimes that seems to happen, that when you have an outbreak of one type of anomaly, you have more of these other anomalies taking place as well. And again, the more I know about it, I think it's very possible that a lot of these various types of occurrences are somehow interconnected and are part of the same stimulus, whatever this is, that's creating what's going on.
Yeah, it's very reminiscent of the Skinwalker Ranch, which you touched on earlier, which brings me to a question about that very thing. Do you think this phenomenon has always been there in this way, i.e. places on the planet where things like this can be seen or observed, but because there's more people around nowadays, because there's more technology around these days, and because it's easier for us to communicate, these stories are getting out now?
Well, I think, again, in some cases, people are at least more aware of the subject. A lot of people, most of the people call me still, they'll tell me their story. A lot of them tell me very reluctantly. They don't want to tell anybody. But at least they're more willing to share their story. They just don't want to be identified. They want to remain anonymous. And that's very, very, very common. Some of these locations have a historic long history of strange things happening in those locations. Like ghostly apparitions, sometimes Native American connection to some of those areas. You have the UFO sightings, the balls of light, the creature reports, Black Panther sightings. That's another thing I can tell you about. And all the weird things going on. So some of these places, it seems as though the phenomena, for whatever reason, seems to focus on certain properties or certain locations, and it goes on for a long, long time. And there are several of these places here in this area in Pennsylvania that are active like this, and they're going on all over the country now from many other locations, we understand.
Now, obviously, we know with the Native Americans and that they've got a long oral tradition and history. and these things come up. So to me, it suggests that these things have always been there. It's just that we're almost freshly discovering it in the last 100 years or so. Yeah, that's what it seems to me. I may be wrong. I do want to get into the Thunderbird topic with you, by the way, because that's also highly intriguing. But a question regarding the Bigfoot, and I know you all have been asked this before, but I'm keen to know the answer. There's the supposed link with grey aliens, that they can almost project images into people's minds, so that it might be a grey alien stood there, but you are seeing something different. Have you had thoughts on that and reports of that?
Well, there are so many different theories out there what we're dealing with, but you got to remember, if these are some type of hallucinations, these are some type of optical illusions, something along that line, that doesn't explain the physical evidence being found at many times over the years at some of these locations as well. And the electromagnetic effects involved. There's a lot more of this than any of us understand. It's very intriguing. It's very strange. I don't think anybody understands, including the government. I think that's why there's so much secrecy, because I really think they're aware of these type of things, but they don't have the answers either. They're trying to figure it out. And I'm telling you, I thought years and years ago when I was dealing in early days with all these UFO reports that some of the cases we could not explain were very possibly extraterrestrial visitors. The more I know about it, and I've said this for a long time, I think there's more than one origin to the unknown category of the UFO mystery. Maybe a small percentage might be extraterrestrial, but I think more and more, a lot of these incidents, again, have a physical and non-physical component to it. They come and they go, they're here and they're gone, and it's similar. A lot of UFO reports, or UAP reports they call them today, I mean, we have many reports of large solid objects in daylight just hovering and slowly beginning to fade away. In other cases, they're hovering and they just suddenly vanish. But in other cases, they physically change from one form into another, which is just really amazing. And there have been some really amazing cases even in the last couple of years. And I'll give you an example of one. This happened November 16th, so just not that long ago. This, again, is way up in the mountains of Fayette County. This is near the town of Point Marion. So this is a beautiful afternoon, November 16th. It's very beautiful weather for November in this time of the year. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The weather was clear, around 60 degrees. And this neighbor happened to go outside. Was going to take a walk because it was so nice outside. She happens to look over her neighbor's roof, look over her neighbor's home, and here about 50 feet over the neighbor's roof is this very large, solid, black triangular object that's making no sound. But as she's watching this thing, it's physically changing form, physically changing shape from a triangle to a square. And it continues to do this. So she's watching this thing, can't figure out what this thing might be. So she thought, I better call my neighbor since it's over her home. So she goes in the house and tries to call the neighbor, and there's no answer. So she decides, well, I better walk over to tell her what's going on. So when she walks over, she finds the neighbor working outside in her yard. The neighbor had no idea this thing was over her home. So when it's pointed out to her, they're both watching this object. And as they're watching this thing changing form, it rises up to about 500 feet above the roof. It's there for a short time, and then it rises higher into the sky till it looks like just a dark spot in the sky, and it's gone. And that's the kind of things that are going on, and you rarely ever hear about them, but these things are taking place.
Yeah, it is an amazing topic. Now, it throws up a question for me on how you react to these reports coming to you. Do you still get the same kick today out of each report coming to you that you did on your very first one?
Well, yeah, and again, I think you find them more and more interesting. So the whole thing is this. When I started going out in the field in 1965, it became apparent to me, because I was skeptical but open-minded. I worked in the electronics field all my life, and then over the years, I was associated with many high-tech people investigating these cases. And most cases, whether it's a UFO sighting or even a cryptid or Bigfoot sighting, if you take the time to properly investigate, many are determined to be either natural or man-made in origin. So there's a lot of, especially UFO reports we can explain. There are many, many sightings this year, in the last couple of years, of the string of lights going across the sky, which are Starlink satellites. You get bright meteor reports, you get drone reports, you get people launching sky lanterns, you've got meteorological phenomena. There's a lot of things that look odd, but many cases we can explain. But when you get cases like this of these large objects hovering, you get these big cigar-shaped things, which you got some pretty good pictures of. They're not cases that you can easily explain. Witnesses can see these things are wingless. They're making no sound. And some of these cases, like the one I told you about happened in 1987, these are low-level reports, and I have many, many cases like that.
I think it's telling as well what you said earlier regarding to the witnesses, the ones who don't want to come forward or the ones that don't want to give their names out. That is almost an animal reaction in and of itself, which tells you that they're telling the truth. Because if you want to gain from a story and make something up, you'll try to monetize it somehow. How many people do you think of all these reports are people of that persuasion that don't want anything out there?
Very, very high percentage, probably 98% of what I still deal with. People calling in, talk to me about these things, or people. I've given a lot of lectures in the last few years in many different areas, and everywhere I go, people come up to me, and some do it. They pull me aside, or they contact me afterwards. They call me at home or email me, and they want to share their experience with me, but they don't want to talk around to other people. That's very, very common. And, you know, in the last year or two, when I was talking to some of these audiences, some of them were pretty big crowds. One of the first questions I asked was, how many of you are aware that the U.S. government has a new office that's seriously investigating UFO sightings? Almost nobody knew it. So I don't think that had a great bearing on the fact that we had these great UFO reports coming in, because these people didn't even know about this type of thing. And with Bigfoot sightings, whatever, people are so reluctant to talk to me. And you brought up thunderbirds. It was probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago now that a man called me on the phone, and you could just tell by his voice that he was still shaken. And he said, this happened a few years ago to my son and I. He said, I've only talked to a couple of people very close to me. He said, I just happened to see you on a TV show a while back, and I thought, he said, you're in my area, and I thought maybe I should talk to you about it. It was an incredibly good thunderbird sighting. It happened in the Pittsburgh area a few years ago, apparently. And he and his son were out hiking or walking, and suddenly this gigantic, huge bird fell from the top of the tree and came over like 20, 25 feet over top of their head, and got an extremely great look at this huge thing with this massive wingspan. I mean, this guy was still shaken. And this is what I deal with. People quite often, I mean, their lives are changed. I talk to hunters who went out in the woods for years and years, used to hear stories about strange creatures, especially Bigfoot, and they used to laugh about them till they had their own experience. And I'm telling you, 5, 6 years ago, I'm interviewing a couple hunters, and they're sitting there, these big, husky guys, and they have tears coming out of their eyes because they said, we love the woods, and we'll never go back in the woods again. That's the kind of reaction you get. You know these people have nothing to gain. Nobody knows about who they are.
The thunderbirds has always intrigued me, almost in a way, more than the Bigfoot thing, because it almost suggests some version of ancient bird or pterosaur or something like that, which then leads you down the path of, is there some sort, the interdimensionality thing that we were talking about? I wonder if there's a time component as well, where it's bleeding in from from our history or something.
And it could very well be, because it's the same type of thing. You have all these different creature reports coming in from Bigfoot now to place black panthers and winged humanoids and thunderbird sightings and these very thin, hairless, bony humanoid creatures have been seen more and more in the last few years, and all kind of have gliding, floating entities and all kind of stuff I've investigated. You cannot possibly have so many type of unknown species out there, but at the same time, you've got so many credible people from widespread areas that don't know each other telling you the little details, the same details. You can't eliminate the reports. There has to be something else involved. The only thing that makes any sense is that, once again, theoretically, we're dealing with something that's coming from another reality, another dimension, under certain conditions. It comes into our reality, can leave evidence that's gone. They come and they go and they're gone. That's all that makes sense. That's the only thing that makes any sense anymore. And talking about thunderbirds, here's what I found out. I've been dealing with thunderbird reports for many, many years. So you've got a number of different types, let's say, for example, under the topic of thunderbirds. First, the main one is just huge, oversized birds. So they're generally dark brown or black. Wingspans estimated between about 10 to 20 feet in width. Sometimes they're standing up and they're about 4.5 feet tall. very, very large. Again, with Thunderbird reports, it's like UFO sightings. It is very difficult to judge size and altitude. But we have cases where these things were very low off the ground, or in some cases, they were actually on the ground and needing roadkill. And I can give you one example. This was, my gosh, let me see what my memory is today. About 2007, in a neighboring county here, neighboring area outside of Pennsylvania, not that far away, man telling me, he said, it's a 2-lane road. I'm riding down the road early that morning, and I had to hit my brakes very hard. Here's this huge, giant bird right in front of my vehicle, hopping like 1 foot to another, and it's eating roadkill. And it stood, he said, it was taller than the top of my vehicle. It's about 4.5 feet tall. He said, the wings are spread out. It's flapping its wings. It's hopping from 1 foot to another, trying to get off the ground. It's so big, it can barely get off the ground. But he said, I'm watching the wingtips, the ends of the wingtips on the 2-lane road, the edge of the road. He said, I see all this dust and dirt going up. I can see the end of the wings. And finally, it makes its way, and it goes over top of the trees, and it's gone. He went out the next day and measured the width of the road to see the wingspan. It was 21 feet across.
Crikey, that's huge. Now, what's the largest recorded living bird that's resident in the US or the Americas?
Oh, you know, we have a number of species here in Pennsylvania that are 6 and around 8 feet, and that's about it. And a lot of people are used to seeing them around here. But these descriptions are completely different, but things get much more interesting. So you got that type of description, and then you get the reports of these leathery skinned, featherless, generally black bats, huge bat-shaped objects as well, or creatures, I should say. So we get this huge leathery black bats that are being reported for years. And then you got another category, and I've interviewed some people that have had amazing encounters, very credible people who know what they saw, and they said what they saw looked prehistoric. They looked like a pterodactyl or pterotorn.
Yeah.
And very detailed reports. And then you go into the case where we have these winged humanoid, or huge winged humanoid cases, such as the case they've become known as the Butler Gargoyle here in Butler County, north of Pittsburgh, happened in 2011, which apparently there's been other witnesses to it in past years. But I've got to know this fellow and his family very well, very professional. And this guy is 2011 near East Brady, Pennsylvania. Late at night, he's coming home. His headlight hit something on the right side of the road in the field, and he thought it was a deer. Suddenly, this form stands up, and this thing takes 3 big steps in front of his vehicle and crosses the road. It walked in front of a big sign. This thing was at least 8 foot tall. It was a little over 8 foot tall, and he said to me, when I interviewed him initially, he said, this thing was not a Bigfoot. He said, I hear people talk about Bigfoot. He said, no, this thing was kind of a light, leathery skinned creature. It had claws for hands. The eyes were swept back, and it had wings tucked into its back. And within days, the BORU research group up in that area received several other reports of people seeing the exact thing in that same general area.
Yeah, it is mental, isn't it? All the different types and stuff that you're collating here. What do you think about that picture that was circulated probably 20 years ago of the sort of like pterosaur creature in like an old photo where the old men of old were holding its wingspan open? I mean, this was before AI and stuff.
Yeah, it's the one I'm thinking. It's very interesting. I believe there were 2 different ones. I could be wrong. I'm so busy just dealing with cases here on a regular basis, and I'm interested in what's going on around the country. I try to monitor as best I can, but I don't have time to follow up on all those reports. So I just what I read on the internet, and again, you can't always be sure of all the details you're getting, but there's some indications that yes, from some that they question if it's real, and other people question it's real. It looks very, very interesting. It looks very, very good. So I don't know, but
I know it does look
really
amazing.
Can't speculate because I don't know the origin of it.
No, I don't either, but I do like the photo, to be fair. Let's quickly touch on black panthers before we get into the Kecksburg incident, which is also incredibly intriguing. The black panthers, right? I live in an area of England called the Cotswolds, and there's reports constantly, well, not constantly, but every now and again you'll see reports and like even photos of black panthers in the area. Is that the same thing that you're getting over there? Or is it a different type of cryptid?
So, here in Pennsylvania, I'm here in southwest Pennsylvania, and I've heard reports not only from Pennsylvania, but from many other eastern states, we don't have black leopards or black jaguars like you do in Asia and Africa here in this part of the world. But they've been seeing them for years and years. I interviewed a hunter who called me several months ago in daylight from Southwest PA where he was hunting that afternoon, and he used to laugh at people talking about it, but he said, I heard stories about people seeing black panthers, and he went into great description. He said, nobody would ever have convinced me until I saw it that that's what it was. And he said positively, I think he said the body was at least 3.5 foot long, and the tail was 3 to 4 foot long. And he got a very good look at the solid black, huge cat moving through the woods very close to him. I've interviewed many, many people who've seen them. But here's what's really intriguing, and I'll tell you an amazing story in a minute.
Cool.
Anyhow, sometimes in the areas when you have an outbreak of Bigfoot sightings or weird things going on, you have an outbreak of other cryptids or out-of-place animals such as black panthers. So sometimes the black panthers are showing up at the same time that people are seeing Bigfoot in the same area. And it's the same thing. People see them. Sometimes we find paw prints. There's other evidence, and then they're gone. You never see them. They don't seem to bother anybody, nor does Bigfoot in Pennsylvania. There have been hundreds of cases I've investigated. They've come very close to people. They've approached people fairly close, and they generally run off. Yes, there have been reports of them throwing fairly good-sized boulders and tree branches towards people, but not going after them, hurting them. But with the Black Panther reports, again, you never find any bodies of any of these things. There's nothing escaped from zoos, that type of thing. So anyhow, to show you the interesting connection, just like I told you about the story where the Bigfoot had vanished back in '74. So in February 1983, way up in the mountains again here in Pennsylvania, it was early morning. I think it was around 1 o'clock in the morning. This man's coming home and his car's overheating. He pulls into his driveway and he goes into his home to get a can of antifreeze. He comes back out and he's starting to put antifreeze in the car. And he said about 2 minutes later, he hears this loud growl, and he turns around about 20 feet away. It's this large black cat sitting there growling at him. We didn't get very excited. He's out in the country, and there's stray cats all over the place. So he goes back, and he's putting more antifreeze in the car. About 3 minutes later, he hears a louder growl. He turns around. He said, I couldn't believe what I'm seeing. That big cat has now physically grown to twice its size. It's growling at him. He said, I threw the antifreeze can at it. It growled and started walking up the road that was well lit outside. He said, I ran into my house to get my pistol. He said, I came out a few minutes later, and he said, now I really couldn't believe it. He said, now I'm looking at this huge cat out there that looks like a black panther like I saw in the zoo. It has the long tail, but it has glowing yellow eyes. It's growling at me. He said, I took a shot at it. I don't know if I hit it, but moments later, it physically vanished in front of me and was gone.
Yeah, that's an odd one, isn't it? Is that an outlier, or is that indicative of other cases similar?
Well, that's the only one that I can say directly like that, but I've had other Black Panther reports that are pretty strange and unusual too. It's the same thing with the Thunderbird reports. You get these reports. We had one, believe it or not, about 2 weeks ago in daylight up in an area. We've had a lot of anomaly cases, a lot of cryptid cases. This was in the afternoon, and this thing was not that far away. It was standing on the ground next to a tree, but it was a white one. And you rarely hear about the white one. I'd say probably in the last 10 years, I've heard several reports of white ones that are very, very rare. But this thing, the witness said, it was huge, had at least a 12-foot wingspan, that opened up its wings, and it finally grows. I was having trouble getting off the ground. It was really flapping hard to get over the trees. But this person said it looked kind of prehistoric. It had like a horn or something on the top of its head, and she said it looked prehistoric looking. So it's another odd, more unusual case than the norm.
Yeah, Thunderbirds and Black. I'm going to relate the Black Panthers to this country, right? Because this is what I'm used to. I think, and I could be wrong because I've not investigated it, but I think there are going to be people out there that have their own private collection of animals and that will have got out. They've released them because they couldn't look after it or something. And there could be a breeding pair in the wild and stuff. And that can happen, obviously, in your country as well. It's those outlier cases that make you think something really weird is going on, isn't it?
Well, there's not that many of these jaguars jaguars, cougars. Well, I should say jaguars in Pennsylvania, and leopards in zoos. There's not that many around. If one of them had gotten loose or were missing, we would know about it, and we try to check those things out. That's not a common thing whatsoever. And again, it's interesting because sometimes you get these reports when these things are occurring in a certain area, then you get all of a sudden other people in the same area reporting Bigfoot sightings and Black Panther sightings. It seems to be interconnected. And yes, I can tell you over the years, mountain lions, that's a whole different story. Pennsylvania for years had mountain lions. Officially, they've been long gone, but people report them every year. That's a completely different type of thing to discuss. And we know people back years and years ago did. They couldn't control them, so they released them illegally into the woods. So some of those reports were that. But then over the years, I've had reports of cubs and adults and more than one adult big mountain lion seen together. So that's interesting too. But that's a completely different thing from the Black Panther reports. And I think some of those cases are quite interesting.
Oh, I do too. I love all of this cryptid and UFO-y sort of stuff. And I know you mentioned earlier that you've never had your own experience. Do you wish that you did, or are you happy not having seen anything?
Well, I've seen a lot of evidence, and I can tell you, during that wave in 1973, when my teams were out there day and night investigating reports, and there were some farms out in this area that the owners said these creatures, these Bigfoot, would periodically come back. So we tried to stake them out when we could. But anyhow, there was one night when they had called, we had left there, and we had gotten back to my home, which is probably at least a half an hour away, and they said the thing just came back. So we hurried out with a team out there. It was already dark. When we got there, there's big footprints in the barnyard. The dogs on the farm wouldn't make a sound or move. They had a great big cornfield, and something bipedal, very heavy, was already running away from us. You could tell his bipedal was very big, moving very fast, making this very loud sound like somebody with asthma, heavy breathing sound. I chased it through the dark, chased after it, could never catch up to it, but I recorded the sounds.
And that's the closest you've got to anything, is it?
As far as I know, that's about the closest I'm aware of.
Oh, I like that phrase, though, as far as you know. Yeah, because there could have been something literally behind you or above your head that you were not, aware of. That's an interesting thought in itself. Go on.
There was a lot of amazing incidents happened during 1973. I'll tell you, many of them. And, you met so many intriguing people and people who didn't believe in it. One of my favorite stories was, let me think here, September 3rd of 73. It was a little village outside of Latrobe, PA, which is not far from that part of the Chestnut Ridge where there have been many, many Bigfoot sightings for weeks. It had been in the local newspaper. People seen this huge hairy thing. And this fellow, and he's long passed, his wife has passed away. We became very good friends. And Chester gave me permission not only to talk about what happened, but actually he and his wife were so frightened after this, they actually packed their clothes and left for a short time and came back. When he came back, he went on TV and news with me and told his story. He said, I would never, ever believe this till I saw it. And Chester, the night before this happened, he was sitting on this patio with his neighbors and his wife making fun of Bigfoot. We're laughing about it in the paper and saying people were crazy. And he said about 4:30 in the morning, he's sleeping in his mobile home. He hears this big bang against his mobile home. So he had a garage behind there, and he had a nice antique car. He thought somebody was breaking in to steal the car. Mm-hmm. So he leaves the lights out, and he goes up and looks out the window, and he said, couldn't believe what I was seeing. He said, here's this huge, hairy creature a foot away from me, basically a foot away on the opposite side of the window, looking away from me towards the neighbor's home with his hands crossed in front of it, just standing there. It was taller than the trailer, which was it was at least 9 foot tall. And he said it just stood there. He said, oh, my God, I couldn't believe it. So Chester was a retired coal miner. He had emphysema. He told me, he said, I could barely breathe. I was so shaken. And I said, I went over and woke my wife and said, that thing they call Bigfoot, it's on our patio. So she gets out, oh, my God, what are we going to do? So back in those days, we had the real telephones. You might remember there were dial telephones. And he dialed O for the operator because you used to have real operators. And he said, I need the state police. So he connected to the state police and said, that thing they call Bigfoot, it's here at my house. So I think it was about half an hour later, you had 6 troopers and 3 cars out there. One of the troopers called me from the scene to come out to investigate it. And Anyhow, when they got on the scene, of course, it was gone. But he had cut the grass that evening, and there was a fresh trail of tracks going across that grass over his patio, going down along the road, and some of the troopers followed the tracks for a distance. Interestingly, at one point, he told me, he said, the tracks suddenly just abruptly ended. And he knew nothing about this stuff, and he said, I don't understand. He said, these things fly, because how could the tracks stop like that? And I remember that very well because it was so interesting. And once again, Chester was a great guy. Like he said, he's long gone, but he went public and he said nobody would ever convince me these things are real until I saw it.
And I think that's the only thing that will convince a lot of people is a personal experience. Obviously, you've been investigating, and I believe anyway. But there's loads of people out there that don't have an interest or think it's all bunkum or hunkum or whatever that word is. I think a personal experience is what convinces people.
It is. And again, some of these people from 20, 30, 40 years ago, I'm still in touch with today. And a lot of these people, they're never back to what they were. It's a completely different thing. But I'll throw something else to you. And again, we could talk for days about these things that are ongoing, what I'm finding. So there are many, many instances, which many of them are. You can have just people from all walks of life, men, women, and children, who see these different type of anomalies. They can be at the right place at the right time and have an experience. A UFO sighting, a Bigfoot sighting, that's the most common. However, there's another group of people, and I talked to one a few hours ago. There's another group of people that from the time they're very young children, sometimes they have missing time cases. Some of the time they're little, they experience apparitions, ghostly things. Throughout their lives, they have UFO sightings, they have had Bigfoot encounters, they've had experience with the balls of light, other unusual effects. But some of these people I've been in touch with for years, later their children begin to experience these things, and now their grandchildren. So it seems to be something that's hereditary. So could it be that certain people have certain abilities? They're able to perceive some of these, whatever it is, for whatever it is, and maybe they have certain capabilities that other people can't. Or is it something within them that the phenomenon is attracted to them?
I think it's both of those things. I'm not one of those people, and I don't think I would say I'm highly intuitive, and I do think I know when things are about to happen, but I'm not able to see things, and I wish I was in a way.
But here's what's really interesting. There's a number of these people I'm in touch with today. These people don't know each other. Some of these people are very well educated. They have good jobs. They own their own companies. They don't know about some of these other people who live some within miles of them. And, for example, last year when all these things are going on, they didn't know that other people were independently calling me, also telling me that they're having an increase in odd activity also going on. I thought that was very intriguing.
Oh, very much so. There's a massive link here. And when I speak to some other people who investigate, I'll just use Preston Dennett as an example, right? He investigates the UFOs. He's had ghost encounters, NDEs, UFO encounters, orbs. It seems to if you've had one thing, you then have the next one, then the next one, then the next one. So it almost does indicate that people then, once you're open to it, the things are attracted to you, or you can see it, or both. It's very, very strange.
Yeah, and I can remember from many, many, many years ago when I first noticed these things, I remember there was one incident where there was a group of people outside, and a couple of them were describing this large solid object hovering very low over top of them, but the other people in the group could not see it.
Yes, I've heard that before.
My mind.
Yeah, that is very, very strange. Preston actually said something very, very similar. So I've heard that one. It's an odd thing. Okay, so let's take a sideways step into what you're probably most famous for, isn't it? The Kecksburg UFO incident and your investigation thereof. Can you tell us the story of it, the best you can, literally from the start through, the chronology essentially, and then we'll break things down if that's okay.
Well, very briefly, we could talk for literally days about Kecksburg. And if you go to my website, some of your readers, I put up a really interesting report from the 58th anniversary of the case on December 9th of last year. So they can read it. And there's some interesting little details that I had brought out on there that a lot of people didn't know about. And there's a lot of details that a lot of people don't know. And there's a lot more to the story. but it was December 9th, 1965. And how I first heard about it, and I was 16 years old. And again, as I mentioned, I had already been interested in UFO sightings from the time I was 10. And I happened to be listening to the big radio station in Pittsburgh, KDK Radio, because they had a talk radio show that was very popular at the time called Contact. And the host of the show had a guest on whose name was, you may recognize, Frank Edwards, who was a journalist who had written some stories on unusual happenings. And so anyhow, I tuned in to listen to Frank Edwards, see what he happened to say. And interestingly, almost the entire program is focused on this breaking news story of this brilliant fireball. This fire object was seen from Ontario, Canada, and from many, many witnesses over Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. And it was about 4:47 p.m. that afternoon. It's just getting dark here in the Pittsburgh area as the phones are ringing off the hook in the police departments, the newspapers, the radio, TV stations, multiple witnesses who are reporting this this very bright fire object moving across the sky. But a lot of people said it was moving quite slowly, and some people thought it was an aircraft that was on fire. So anyhow, as evening goes on, they're interviewing witnesses. There's a news reporter calling in. They're reading the wire news stories coming out that's just breaking on the news. It was an amazing, amazing time. As the evening went on, KDK TV in Pittsburgh was breaking in with one of their primary news reporters that the military was now arriving in the Kecksburg area to search for an unidentified flying object. Well, I'm writing back and forth from one room to the other, from the old black and white TV in those days to the radio. I'm trying to listen to all the latest reports, and I'm writing all this information down and documenting everything. I wasn't driving yet. I had no way to get out there. Kecksburg was about 12 miles away, so it was a rural farming community about 12 miles from Greensburg, PA, where I live. And there was a lot we did not know at the time. The next day, after all this was going on, the first thing I did, I went to the local newsstand to pick up all the local papers. I was hopeful, I hope this makes the news. And there it was, front page in all the local papers. A local paper, the Greensburg Tribune Review, had 2 editions as front page on both editions. The Pittsburgh Press, the Post-Gazette, many of the statewide papers, national papers were picking up the story. And it was an interesting story. The local Greensburg paper indicated that something had reportedly fallen from the sky near Kecksburg, that the military had come in, that no one was being allowed anywhere near the site or the area where the object fell. There was talk there may have been radiation involved. They also mentioned the fact that civilian scientists and Army engineers reportedly on the way to examine whatever may have fallen. And it was a really interesting story. And then the next day, well, of course, this is the next day I'm talking about. It was Friday's paper. The later edition of the paper indicated that there had been a thorough search of the woods by the local authorities, and they had found absolutely nothing. And officially, it was stated that people apparently had seen a bright meteor in the sky. Nothing had been found on the ground, and officially the case was closed. Well, there wasn't a lot for me to investigate at the time because there was hardly any names in the paper, but over a period of weeks and months and years, I tracked down hundreds of people who were involved. I interviewed many reporters. This is what's so interesting about this case. As this is being broadcast on Pittsburgh area radio and TV, hundreds of people from around western PA descended on that little community of Kecksburg. The roads were all blocked. The fire departments were out helping in the search, but shutting down the roads because of the roads and the traffic. A lot of people were there. And anyhow, reporters from radio, TV, newspapers, they became part of the story because they either saw the military trucks or they saw the military or they interacted with some military personnel. So I interviewed all those people. I interviewed multitudes of people who were on the scene. I interviewed state troopers. I interviewed the firemen. I tracked a lot of people down. So what I didn't know at the time was this, because I found some of these people later on. Mm-hmm. Some of the locals who saw the object come in towards the Kecksburg area. Let me tell you this first, because this is important. So anyhow, what I later found out is this. As this object comes in from the Pittsburgh area and moves out in the Westmoreland County over Greensburg where I lived, and I did not see it, it came in over Greensburg, moved out towards Route 30 East, made a turn to the south. So it's seen by people all along these little rural communities moving out to the mountains of Laurelville. One witness was Bill Bush, who unfortunately passed away a couple years ago. He was working on his car and the CB radio under his dash. He sees this fireball. He runs out to the road. He watches fireball movement out through the mountains of Laurel. And he said it kind of hesitated over the mountain, began to track back towards the outskirts of Kecksburg. It did not come down right in Kecksburg. It came down outside of Kecksburg. He jumped into his car, and he went to the highest lookout where you could see all the big wooded areas down there overlooked, and he could see like this blue arcing down in the woods. And he hunted down there, and he said it was so odd. It looked like sparklers, like kids may be playing with blue sparklers or fireworks. So he grabs his flashlight, and he goes down into the woods. And it's a long story, and there's so many parts of it. It's hard for me to keep everything straight because there's so many different aspects to it. Anyhow,
Sure.
When I interviewed him, he took us down to this tree, and he said, I stood right here, and he pointed, and he said, that's where it was. But anyhow, here's what I found out that I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Right after this object had fallen locally, some of the locals saw it. They went down into the woods right after it fell, and that's when they came across this large, metallic, acorn-shaped object semi-buried in the ground. So this thing is big enough for a man to stand inside of it. It's about 10 to 12 feet in length, about 8 to 10 feet in diameter. It's one solid piece of metal, kind of an off-gold bronze color. But there's no separation in it. There's no weld marks, no seams, no bolts, no screws. And on the raised-up part of the back, like you have on the acorn, there were what appeared to be some kind of markings that look more like symbols. And one of the fellows, luckily, who was one of the volunteer firemen who was standing within a few feet of it, because of his background, he was familiar, and he said this was not any type of writing from a Soviet spacecraft. He looked into a lot of this after it happened. He said this was not like that. He said it was more like some type of ancient symbol, like ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. But anyhow, it's a very, very long story. We had found Bill Bush in 1988. He was the second witness, I believe, we found. In 1987 is when we have actually came across the first eyewitness to see the object on the ground who we were able to find. And it was lucky. I was hosting a very, very big UFO display at the local mall here in Greensburg, Westmoreland Mall. Thousands and thousands of people came in to see what we have. My research group was huge. And Jim and his family happened to walk by. I was out to lunch at the time, and one of my associates was there. And we just had a little display on Kecksburg, not very much. And anyhow, he's listening to, I believe, one of my associates, somebody else talking about it, and he said, excuse me, you talking about that thing that fell near Kecksburg back years ago? And they said, yeah. And he said, I was on the search team that found the object. Wow. So they got a hold of me right away, and we pulled him off to the side, and he gave us great detail. And he said he would meet with us later, and we did many interviews with him. And he was not from Kecksburg. He was from another volunteer fire department who came out that late afternoon to search for a possible downed aircraft. So they figured what else could it be? Must be an airplane that crashed in those woods somewhere. So they sent a fireman out to look for a downed aircraft. So anyhow, he goes on telling me that he was a young volunteer fireman. They got the call from the mutual aid and from 911 center. Was even before that, it was the dispatch center in Greens from the police station to the fire department. This was a possible downed aircraft. So he comes out with a couple of the guys he knew in their truck, met other firemen out there. He didn't know the area at all. And they were going to do a grid search. So they had these guys in different trucks who were leaving off in different areas. And he has a walkie-talkie, and they're walking up through the woods. He said it wasn't long. A radio call came over that another team had come across what they were looking for, the fallen object. So he hurries over with a couple of guys, and these guys are all standing on a little embankment looking down, and apparently it looked in the dark like a trench, like this thing had made a trench, and he's looking at this thing, and they're looking for an airplane, and whatever this thing was, he said it was unlike anything they had ever seen before. He knew it was not a meteorite. He knew it was not any type of aircraft they had ever seen before. Described it in detail, and they're looking this thing over, and they weren't there very long when he said suddenly 2 men in trench coats come down through the woods with what appeared to be a Geiger counter, a yellow Geiger counter. They looked at them, they looked at the object and said, this area is now quarantined, get out of here right away. And right behind them are soldiers coming down through the woods. And he said they were so close to each other, they were shining their flashlights on each other. So Jim and a few of these other guys, they didn't know the area well, but they found their way back to Kecksburg, to the Kecksburg truck station, fire department truck station. that they had found at that point that the military was reportedly already using as a temporary military command post. And numerous other people, firemen and civilians, verified the Army trucks in the area, and that they were at the truck station as well as in the town, armed soldiers walking around. So that's just a short part of the story. So they give you what we found out was apparently quite a bit of military started coming in during the evening, and there was a report from many people that a large military flatbed tractor trailer was at the scene. Years later, and that's one of the things I wrote about, found out there wasn't just one, there were two military flatbed tractor trailers at the scene.
I've not heard that bit before.
Well, that's a detail a lot of people don't know. Read the articles on my website. There's some good information on it. Anyhow, the one with the object, the flatbed truck, went out around 1 o'clock in the morning under a military convoy, military escort. Independent sources confirmed to me that it went to Lockbourne Air Force Base near Columbus, Ohio. They backed it into a hangar. The object had a tarp over it. They set up a security perimeter around that hangar. They were given the shoot-to-kill order to anybody approach that hangar without the proper clearance. I was told they stayed there just for a short time, then they continued their journey and ended up at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It was not Hangar 18. It ended up in a building on the base, and where's that today, we don't know. And there's a lot more of the story. We could talk for days and days of what the object was. You know, we can debate it forever and ever. We can discuss it forever and ever. I keep an open mind to it, but there have been many, many theories from the day it happened, but nobody's come up with any definitive proof of what it was. And there's a lot of things about the case that's never been explained.
Yeah, it's a fascinating case. And I know there's lots of details that you haven't touched on there because, like you say, you could talk about it for days to go in through the exact chronology of everything that's happened and who said what and when and all that sort of stuff. The interesting thing to me is there's two parts. This highly interesting. One is the acorn shape, which it comes across unusual. Are there any other UFO incidents that you know of with this type of shape?
It's not very well known, but yes, people have called me about them over the years. Actually, I've seen a couple pretty good pictures of acorn-shaped objects, or people sometimes say more bell-shaped, but they're in the sky. And but a lot of people call it acorn-shaped, and they're not very common. But yes, there have been similar reports.
Interesting. So that is almost corroboration in and of itself. What is this I hear about the creature coming out in some sort of electric cattle prod and an arm coming out? Is that part of your story?
Oh boy, now you're getting a lot of detail.
Oh, so there is that.
You know, you talk to so many people over the years, and I've talked to a lot of very credible people, and I'm telling you, so many of these people, it took them years and years before they would do it. And I know that there are people out there today, because I know this from relatives and friends who were involved in the time, and they still refuse to talk about what they saw that night for whatever reason. I've known this from many, many people. I've heard this over the years and years. I've heard from years ago, and I've talked to people who would swear that they saw photographs taken that night of the object or the military trucks. I talked to one guy who I positively believe, I interviewed him in more recent years, and he said, I personally took pictures of it. He said, I had the pictures, but he said, unfortunately, back years ago when it happened, some of my friends wanted to see it. I gave the pictures to different friends and got passed around, and nobody knows where the pictures are. They're gone. And that's the kind of thing you've heard. I believe were pictures taken. I'm still hopeful that somebody might have in the scrapbook somewhere. Somebody's family might have it. So I'm hoping some pictures may still show up, but who knows?
Well, I hope they do, because it's heartbreaking to hear that, isn't it? That evidence is there, and you just can't get your hands on it.
Yeah, but I also heard, and I know one pretty sure for a fact, that more than one reporter who was on the scene that night had the film confiscated out of their cameras.
Yes, which is telling again, isn't it?
Yeah, so going back to your story, and again, I'm a little rough on some of the details. I deal with thousands of cases, and it's hard to remember everything, believe me. And then I try my best to remember, and luckily I'm still able to remember a lot. There's so much with Kecksburg. There's so much involved in it. I've interviewed so many people. But so going back, let me see where my memory is. So going back to about 2002, I believe it was. Yeah. I believe that's when the Sci-Fi Channel did a big investigation on the Kecksburg case. And you had Leslie Kane involved with the Coalition for Freedom of Information, who was involved in the investigation. They did a lot. They did a huge, huge investigation on the Kecksburg case. You can still go online. You can see an IUR, very big, really great account of a lot of what was uncovered about the case and all the mystery about it and what was found. But anyhow, I heard a lot of stories from a lot of people. I met a lot of people, and you know, I've always kept an open mind. I've always said, one, could it have been some very secretive, very highly advanced space probe that has some type of reentry capability, or could it be extraterrestrial or something not man-made? And I keep an open mind still to all these different possibilities, because over the years I talked to various people who worked in the space program. You talked about what I had, and they all scratched their head and said, we still don't have the technology to make the turns like that, to make the slow descent. The thing's perfectly in shape, and there were no parachutes reported at the scene that night. And that's interesting too. But there were some people who swear that they saw something very unusual involved with the case. So the first thing was, you know, back in 1990, 1990, I believe it was, when the Unsolved Mysteries did their season premiere on the Kecksburg case. And once that aired, there was just a huge gate open of information coming in from all over the country. I got a lot of reports from people who lived in the area at the time and moved away, from old witnesses, from anonymous sources, all kind of stuff. And this one fella, his name was Myron, and he called me and he said, I saw it on TV. He said, I guess I'm allowed to talk about it now since it's on television. I said, well, Myron, what are you talking about? And some of my details may be off a little, but they're probably close, what I'm telling you now. So Myron says, he said, I worked for a large supply house in Ohio. So I was a truck driver. And he said, within a few days of that thing falling in Pennsylvania, a Navy officer came into the office. They ordered a large supply of glazed engineering brick to be sent to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So there was another truck driver who for quite a while would not talk about this. And finally, he gave us the whole story and confirmed the same thing. But anyhow, the other truck driver was at the base with the first shipment of bricks, and he was told, do your job, don't look around. When he went there that day, he was escorted in, and he said there was a flatbed trailer there with the object on it with the tarp. And he said it looked like a big bell with the way it was shaped. The next day, when he and Myron go back with two different trucks full of glazed bricks, they were told again, do your job, don't be looking around. But Myron was a curious guy. And Myron said he sees these fellows. He believed they were Navy personnel from what he saw. They had white coveralls. They had sidearms. They were periodically changing their outer clothing. They were going in and out of this building. At one point, when nobody was around, he hurried over and looked in the entrance, and he saw the object up on scaffolding with ladders going up to it, and apparently men up there trying to get inside this thing. And he said they were apparently trying to get inside to find out what this thing was. But apparently at one point, when he started asking questions, and then they realized this guy didn't have the clearance to be there. And apparently, from what I recall, he was threatened. He was told that forget about everything you saw, or we'll put you in jail and throw away the key. But in 20 years, this will all be public knowledge. And of course, that never happened. But here's the thing: when I filmed a documentary about this back in 1994, I was starting to film it, and I went to his place, and he was in very bad health. And he said to me, "I'm going to tell you something I never told you before." And I guess he talked to his son about the night before, and he said, "Why are you going to tell me?" He said, "Because I may not be here much longer. I want him to know the story." So he goes on to tell me that when he snuck into the building that day, there was a workbench laying in there. It was hard to see. The lighting was not real good, in the same place where the object was, and there was a small body lying on the table with a white sheet over it. So you couldn't see the body. He could just see the cover. But he said there was one arm hanging down that was, I think it was a left arm. He said it only had 3 digits, and it looked kind of like a lizard type of skin. And he said, and I tried over and over again to try and change the story. He said, that's all I could see. That's all I could see. I mean, if you're going to make up a story, you probably make it a lot better with a lot more detail. So that was really interesting. And that then in 2000, okay, and I think I got my story a little mixed up. I said 2005 is when the investigation was started, but I had actually found that fellow Myron in after the Unsolved Mystery Show. That's what that was. But the other part of the story is it was during the time of the investigation that there was a lot of news about this new investigation being done on the Kecksburg case, and a whole bunch of people decided they would come forward and talk to me about what they had. So there was a whole list of people, and there was this particular name, who I'll not say what it is. I keep him. I don't identify who he is. I believe he's passed away, and I called him Joel, and his name had come up. I think it's like 12, 13 years before, as a person who may have been down in the woods during the time the military was down there, who snuck down into the woods, and he was watching the operation. But when I talked to him years before, he refused to talk about it. He said, my family doesn't want me involved. I'm afraid to get involved in it. So he didn't talk to me. But years later, his name come up again when all this came out about the new investigation being done. And I called him right away, and we talked for a while. And he said, well, come on out, I'll talk to you. So when I got out there, he was very hesitant. And he said, look, he said, I talked to my family, and they still don't want me to talk about this thing. But we became friendly. I told him a little bit about the case. And he said, well, you're here. I might as well tell you about it. Well, that ended up leading to several other interviews, long interviews. And again, I could be off on this a little bit, but I think I'm pretty close. And he wanted to tell me, and I'm not going to go into the whole story, but he was apparently, he had hunted down in those woods also. And he was out there, I believe, with his brother that evening. They were up on the road. It was just soon after this thing apparently fell. And it was just getting dark, and he did have a flashlight, but he wasn't using. But he said he could see this like electrical arcing in the woods, which is how Bill Bullybush found it too. And he told me how he got down in there. He drew me a sketch, which was not very good at all. He draws like me, unfortunately. I wish he could draw better. He could have drawn better. And but he taught me about the positioning of this thing, how it was lying down there and whatever. But he goes on to tell me that really interesting. He said, when I gone down there and the soldiers are coming in, I had to keep moving back further and further because they were setting up a perimeter around this object. And I had to keep moving back so they couldn't see him. And he said, there was a man down in the woods. There may have been more than one, but he said there was one man in particular who was in a black suit with a black hat and a tie. And this guy had a camera, and he was telling the soldiers what to do. And he was taking photographs of the object, and he said, from where he could see where the object was, it looked like there was some kind of prints in that area moving across the ground. And he said, I don't know if they were deer, I couldn't see, but they looked odd, but this guy was really interested in them. He was taking a lot of photographs of them. And he said, as he's hiding there watching this, and these military guys come in, this Army officer jumps on top of this metallic object. And he has a long metal pole, he said, like a police billy club. And he said, for whatever reason, he said, these soldiers come in, they're moving around the object. For whatever reason, this guy strikes the top of the object with this device. And he said, moments later, what appeared to be the front of the object that's semi-buried opens up, like a hatch opens up from right to left. And all of a sudden, I remember his voice changing. He began to shudder. His voice was quivering. He said, I swear to God, sir, there was something inside of that thing. And he goes on to tell me he couldn't see it really well, but he said I could see this long elastic arm coming out, opening that hatch. And he said there has to be another arm from my position. I couldn't see it. And he says only moments later, and I believe he told me there was kind of an odd sound, and these various colored lights were coming up from it. And all of a sudden, he said you could hear it hit metal on metal. You could hear the hatch hit. He said, that is all I saw. And then he said, the Army officer was screaming, hurry up, we don't have much time. And he went into great detail how these guys came over, started digging around it, cleaning around it, and they used this metal strapping to winch it. They couldn't bring the military trucks down into the air because of the trees. They had to winch it over. And then a lot of people didn't know this, but I had more than one witness confirm to me that there was a small crane that had been brought down into the site as well. And apparently they used that crane to load it onto the flatbed truck.
And that's what the second flatbed truck was for, presumably, to bring the crane down.
We don't know. Because that flatbed truck, the other one, the one went on early evening that we didn't know about, was carrying some type of material covered with a canvas as well, but it was a longer and lower load, and then one with the object went out around 1 o'clock in the morning, which was more vertical and covered. And so we don't know what was on that other truck, but there's a lot of interesting stories out there. We just don't know. But I'm telling you that hopefully someday I'll have enough confirmation. Which some things I did not reveal, like the fact that there are 2 flatbed trucks out there. It was years till I had enough confirmation on that I told that publicly. And if I have other confirmation, certain details, I might bring it out later on. But I'm just telling you, there's more to the story.
Oh yeah, and it's fascinating. I'm glad I almost got it right. I said a cattle prod, but it was a, a billy club of some variety or some sort of baton. But that creature coming out suggests then clearly that this was some sort of escape pod. And also the manoeuvring of it coming in like a slow descent also lends credence to some sort of escape pod, which then makes you think, I wonder what it was escaping.
Exactly. Yeah, it's very interesting. And again, like I said, I keep an open mind, but so many of the secret space projects from the 65, from the U.S. and Soviet Union have been, they're public knowledge now. They've been declassified. Could there still be something that was so advanced that we don't know about? It's possible, but there's so many elements in this case that is so unusual. And somebody went to great lengths to keep this from the public and from the information coming out. I mean, we tried for years and many sources through Freedom of Information Act to get documents and information, and there was so little we could get. But it was interesting because the only government document on the case was from the Project Blue Book report. And it took a long time to find it. There was another researcher at the time named Ray Boucher and uncovered that document. And interestingly, within that document, first of all, it's not under Kecksburg, PA. It's under Acme, Pennsylvania. And I believe the reason is because I interviewed a family who lived within walking distance of where the object fell. They were involved in the incident. They were interviewed by an Air Force officer at the time. But they had an Acme mailing address. And Kecksburg's under Mount Pleasant Township. So I think the reason it's Acme is because that family's address was under Acme, Pennsylvania. But interesting, within the report, there was a lot of indication. There was a lot of government agencies that wanted more information on it, trying to find out what was going on. And it talked about the search and nothing was found. But in the report it says, and I can be off a little, but I think I'm quoting pretty close, a 3-man team, so we're talking about Air Force, a 3-man team has been dispatched to Acme, VA to investigate and pick up an object to start the fire.
Wow. So, yeah, I love this one. What's the latest information you have? Have any new details come to light recently that enhances this case for you?
From eyewitnesses, nothing really good in recent years from eyewitness accounts. It's a lot of the people who are just confirming other people's reports. So, for example, last year at the Kecksburg UFO Festival, the firemen, and their firemen were involved in the incident, and I believe all those firemen are now deceased. I interviewed most of them who were involved that night. And but every year they have this big festival. Thousands of people from all over the country come in for it now, and many people walk around. And I met several new witnesses, and these guys were all in their probably my age group, 70s, 80s, but they were kids at the time. And they all separately, they were individually coming over hours just telling me about it, didn't know about the other ones, telling me they'd never forget that night, how their parents brought them out to there and they saw the Army trucks and the soldiers around, and they would never forget it. There is no doubt that the military was there, no doubt whatsoever. The military doesn't send armed soldiers out looking for meteors. It just doesn't happen.
Of course not. No, and meteors don't turn in the air anyway, do they? So that's a game over on that one. They
don't move slowly, and they don't drop down with no parachutes.
That's exactly right. And then they don't look like an acorn, and then they don't have hieroglyphics on them. What is the piece of the puzzle that you're missing? Or is there a piece of evidence that you really, really want to get hold of?
Well, after so many years now, you're still hopeful something might surface. There have been many, many searches done, especially when Leslie Kean did their investigation. They uncovered a lot of things, but nothing showed up, which was so unusual. You can go on the internet and you can read some of these reports that are still out there on the Kecksburg and NASA investigation or whatever, and it's very, very intriguing. But you're hopeful that maybe some documents will come out. Maybe there's somebody out there still living who was involved, be willing to talk about it now. We'll have to wait and see. The people who I believe would have known about these things have all passed away.
Yeah, and that's the shame of life, isn't it? That it's so fleeting that a lot of quality information and stories that we will never have heard have disappeared into the ether.
That's it. Yeah, there's so much. The public has no idea what's going on. These things I'm dealing with all the time. These things go on regularly. It's not something that's a rare occurrence. These things go on very commonly. And and I think I mentioned earlier, when I've done these lectures, almost everywhere I go, people come up to be about things they've seen recently in the last year. And some of these are really detailed reports, and none of these people report it to anybody. We can't even imagine how much of this is going on.
I know, so there's some stigma is still in the air, isn't there, in people's minds, or fear, or whatever's driving them to keep it secret. But I think people are getting more and more open, especially with like the shows you've been on, Coast to Coast. It's becoming more popular, and then once it's more popular, it's in the zeitgeist, it's in people's consciousness, and in theory, across the course of time, everyone should then be open. Is what
Well,
we're
yeah,
hoping
I
for.
think more people are realizing there's a lot of shows taking it more seriously now, but they
Hmm.
still don't want to be identified. They want to share their experiences. What I've noticed in the last few years, I've had quite a number of more elderly witnesses, not just at Kecksburg, but other cases in general, who are contacting me, and they said, well, I just have to share the experience before I pass away. Somebody needs to know what happened to me. And you hear such great detailed sightings from the time they were kids and what happened with their families. And, they just want to share it and let people know these things really happened.
Hmm. And it's a shame that they've had to keep it inside for that long because it's probably grated at them across those years.
Yeah, well, again, believe me, again, some of these families I've known for years and years. I've got to know their kids and their grandkids in some cases. And their lives were so changed by what happened to them. I mean, it's just amazing because, again, the fact is they encountered something that's not supposed to exist, and many of them went through a lot of ridicule, and they just couldn't deal with it.
Mm. It's such a shame that. Right, let's branch into some other topics before we enter the Koit zone and then wrap up. The first thing I want to talk about is the jellyfish UFO. Have you seen that video?
I have, of course, I'm not involved in investigating it. It's interesting. It's
Mm.
not the common thing that I've seen, but again, some of the pictures and some of the reports I get are so strange and unusual. But it looks very interesting. But again, I don't know all the details of what really happened, but I
Okay.
think we have to keep an open mind to that possibility. We got to eliminate all the possibilities to it. And I think that's my understanding. That's what's being done. Your first thought is it's some type of unusual balloon, but that may not be the case.
No, I think it's a lush one, that one. I'd love to see where this goes, this one, because I think it's going to remain open. My initial thoughts is it's obviously some sort of, what's she called, cloaked craft that is just, being a sensor, taking readings, this, that, and
Yeah.
the other. That's what I think it is. What do you
Well,
reckon?
I think what's interesting about the case is, if I recall, that there was some detail where the object went into the ocean, went into the water,
That's
and
right,
came back
yes.
out. I think that's a part of it.
Mm, yeah.
And if that's the case, I'm interested in it because, the government's interested in what they call transmedium cases, transmedium objects.
Yes.
So these are objects that see not only in the sky, but go in and out of the oceans, of course, with the military reports you've been hearing about. But here in Pennsylvania, for years and years, I've talked about this. There are numerous reports of these objects going in and out of the rivers and lakes of Pennsylvania, or many sightings around bodies of water. I've even had reports of very strange things seen in the rivers around Pittsburgh. So this has been going on for years and years. It's nothing new.
Correct. It isn't anything new, but I thought this one stood out for me in that it's such a strange shape, and that's what I like also about the Kecksburg is that a strange shape, so they stand out. Um, do you think a disclosure will ever happen?
Well, to be honest with you, I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime unless something so big happens, so huge. I don't think it's going to happen. And the reason I say that is this: I've heard this for years and years. I believe it was back in maybe 1975, 76. There was a lot of talk within the UFO community, and I was in contact with a lot of well-known names at the time that there was going to be a major release of information, and certain bits of that may have happened, but it never did occur. You hear this every once in a while, but I truly believe the government does know more than telling the public, but it's a worldwide phenomenon. They're not in control of what's happening. They know what's going on. I truly believe they don't understand it either. They know what's happening. I think they're finding, as I have and some other researchers, that once again, this may not be extraterrestrial, at least not all of it. It may be something else that's much closer to it. We may be dealing with something that's from another reality, another dimension. There's a physical and non-physical component to it. I think it's a lot more when you say unidentified anomalous phenomena. Well, as they're calling them now, well, that's much closer to what I think it is, because I think a lot of these different phenomena, these different things we're dealing with, these anomalous events are all interconnected somehow. We just do not understand it.
I agree. I long have held the opinion that all these paranormal phenomena, we'll call them, they all overlap. They might be separate things, but they're linked, aren't they? They all overlap. There's an intersection there. Right, let's go into two questions before we enter the Koit zone. What's your favourite investigation you've ever been on, if you have one?
Oh my, there are so many. Of course, the most famous one is a case I told you a little bit about it that occurred October 25th of '73 with the huge UFO land in the field and the two Bigfoot at the same time.
Yeah.
And all the things that happened and the large investigation was done. That's truly the case that stands out among hundreds and hundreds of very strange cases, among the thousands I've been involved in. There are so many of them, I can't even begin to talk about it. It's just amazing. But that case, and of course that one where the woman shot at the Bigfoot and it disappeared, they kind of stand out. But there were so many, and I deal with so many interesting cases year after year. But I think these small spheres of light in recent years, daylight coming right up to people, are just amazing reports, and they're very important. It's a part of the UFO mystery that you rarely ever hear about, and it's something that really needs to be looked into. It's been going for years and years, and I'm telling you, it's an important part of what we're dealing with.
Oh, 100%. I love it. I'm going to ask you a question now that I ask every single person I interview. Now, you've already mentioned to me that you are not, you've never seen a ghost, UFO, etc., etc. But what strange things have happened to you? Now, that could be a weird person you've met in your life, a coincidence that stands out. What strange thing has happened to you?
Oh boy, we've had some very interesting cases over the years with mystery men showing up. It's very, very rare, and this was over many, many years. I think probably one of the most interesting things that showed up was during 1973. During the UFO Bigfoot outbreak, and it was September 1973. Among the many, many calls I'm getting from this area and all over the country about all things going on, that a man contacted me, told me he worked for the government, that they were very interested in the investigation I was doing on the Bigfoot things here in Pennsylvania. At that time, I was given the name of a laboratory, an address, a contact, and a phone number in Washington, D.C. in the event that we came up with a body or any really well-documented evidence at that time. I never had to call them, but I can tell you, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks later, I got a call from one of the congressman's office here in Pennsylvania. They requested a meeting with me. 2 people from the office came and met with me. They were very professional, very cordial, very open-minded. I did share them the phone number I got from that person. They verified it was indeed a government phone number. I did keep in touch with those fellows for many, many years. They were very supportive. And so that was kind of an interesting thing. It kind of stands out.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you for that story. Stan, we are now entering the Koit zone. Koit zone! Now, in the Koit zone, I'm just going to ask you some inane, irreverent, and sometimes silly questions, in with some just stuff about you. So it's like personal questions. You can give as much or as little answer as you wish. But so here we go. First one, butter or margarine for you?
Oh, I always like butter better.
And I agree with you on that one. It tastes so superior. What was your favorite toy as a child?
I played with chemistry sets and electronic items. I built crystal radios. That was my thing.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Is that what do you think led you to your passion for investigation work?
Yeah. I remember building a crystal radio and hearing some broadcasts from around the world on this little crystal radio. I was amazed that a little kid that I can hear a radio station from around the world. And that's what really got me interested.
Yeah, I love that, on something you built as well. Like, it's almost like magic to a child, isn't it?
Yes, it was. It was great.
Amazing. What time of day do you do your best work?
Probably in the evening, early to late evening. I do my best work.
Excellent. Make your ideal burger. Tell us how you're building it.
Oh boy, you're my favorite subject. I love to cook. I should have been a chef.
Oh, really? Wow.
And I do it many different ways, but I always make my own fresh burger. And sometimes like cheese. I like mine with mayonnaise, lettuce, tomato, and onion.
Okay. See, now you've done it wrong there, Stan, because you've included onion, which is one of the worst ingredients ever made. But that's what you like. That's fair enough. What's the last thing you bet on?
I don't bet on too much of anything.
Oh, that's fair enough. Have you ever broken a bone?
uh, I will say I have not, but I don't want to talk about it because I don't want it to happen.
Oh, yeah. You don't want to bring that into existence. That's fair enough. What's your favorite flavor?
I'd say chocolate.
Good choice. Mine too. Here's an interesting one. This will tell a lot about you. Have you ever stolen anything? And if so, are you brave enough to tell us the story?
I can't think of anything. Maybe I get a piece of chocolate candy off one of the grandkids.
Yes. Everyone's stolen something. We know. Do you have a favorite TV show?
To be honest, I don't. I watch a lot of news on all different channels. But back in the day, in the 50s and 60s, I loved the Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, One Step Beyond, and it was just amazing. And you think back now of all those shows and how much of that has now become a reality.
Completely agree. And there seems to be an awful lot of researchers like yourself that are inspired heavily by the Twilight Zone. You know, so it's got a lot to answer for.
Fascinating. I still watch the clips every once in a while.
Yeah, it's a great program. Here's a one for you. Bath or shower?
Shower.
Good. Yeah, me too. And let's go to the last Koit Zone question. If you were offered a one-way trip to Mars as part of a future settlement, would you go?
Probably not. Maybe after it's been developed for many, many years, but you know, you got family here and friends, and I'd need to know a lot more about the safety of it, and I think it would have to be quite a while till it was developed before I would take a trip like that.
Me too, and I don't blame you for answering that way. Thank you for that. That's the end of the Koit Zone. Two final questions. First one, what else do you like to do in your downtime, if you have any? Any activities or guilty pleasures?
Oh, my. Well, you know, every once in a while I like to go with the family somewhere we haven't visited and get places with the grandkids. And I'm always busy. There's always things going on around here. So my days with reports coming in, the website stuff, I'm busy every day. Days go very quickly.
Excellent stuff. And the last question for you. What are you currently working on?
I'm currently always working on investigating new reports. I'm doing I have a lot of interviews I've just done. I have a lot more scheduled to do a lot more podcast shows, and there's other projects in the works, and you'll probably hear about them as the months go on.
I hope to do that. I always like listening to you on podcasts, Stan, and I'll say this to you now. And I said the same thing to Reverend Michael Carter when I interviewed him. There's something about your voice that resonates with me. All right, it always has ever since I discovered you on Coast to Coast many, many years ago. Has anyone else ever said that to you?
I don't know in the same way, but I had a lot of people hear me on shows, and they said it was just something that they needed to call to talk to me, and a lot of people do. What that reason is, I don't know.
Yeah, I think your voice stands out, and it's always intrigued me, and I like it. And so I'm so glad you said yes to this interview. You've almost fulfilled a dream for me, so thank you for that. And I must say that even though you sort of like self-effaced your memory was tremendous. You've come up with dates, times, connections, names, everything. I can't even remember yesterday, so well played to you, fine sir, on that one.
Well, I've been happy for that, and I hope it stays that way for a long time. But I'd like to tell your listeners, go to my website. It's stangordon.info, and there's a lot of information on there. There's a lot of detailed reports on some on Kecksburg, but a lot of the incidents have happened in recent years and last year. And there's ways to contact me by way of email and phone on my website as well. And all my books are available at Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com.
Excellent. And all those links will be in the description to this video. So if you like what you've heard today, Go and pay attention to some of Stan's stuff. Go and buy his books. It's great information, as you've heard tonight. So Stan, thank you ever so much for coming on, and thank you listeners and viewers for watching and listening along. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on.
No worries. Thank you. To watch other KoitCast episodes, please click the image top left. To subscribe to my channel, please click the image top right. Please like and share to help KoitCast grow, and most importantly of all, please click the notification bell so you never miss an upload.